Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Taylor Ward, she, her, and I am the Communications and Education Manager here at Just Solutions Collective. The Just Solutions Collective identifies and promotes just solutions to climate change from Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and frontline diasporas, and provides informed analysis, research, reports, and more on the just solutions for the climate crisis and supports the replication of community developed, equitable, and just solutions projects policies. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on understanding the impact of hydrogen hubs on environmental justice. We are super excited to host this webinar in partnership with the Climate and Clean Energy Equity Fund, an organization that is strategically building power by investing in the leadership and organizing of diverse communities bearing the brunt of climate change. Today, we will hear from some amazing practitioners who will share their knowledge and expertise on hydrogen hubs and their contexts in EJ communities with us. Our event will start with a review of the basics around hydrogen from Jillian Du, Research and Engagement Strategist at the Equity Fund. And then we'll think about this topic in the context of the IRA with Sylvia Chi, Senior Strategist at the Just Solutions Collective. This will lead us to our panel presentations, where we'll hear from Shauna Lazaro, Legal Director at Communities for a Better Environment, as well as Daniel Chu, Energy Planner at New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. After this, we'll open up to questions from the audience, as well as answer some of the questions you all proposed during the registration process. So throughout the presentations, feel free to use the Q&A box or the chat function to chat with us and engage and ask questions. And with that, I will hand it over to Jillian.
Hi all. I'm Jillian Du from the Equity Fund's Policy Accelerator, and this year we have done a lot of research on different kind of energy transition concerns, especially with the perspective of equity, environmental justice, as a way to support many of the grassroots groups in our network. And hydrogen is definitely a big one that's been coming up this year. And so this presentation will really just level set for us why hydrogen gas is a false promise, and then we'll get to hear from community-based org representatives on the fight and effective ways and strategies we should be thinking about hydrogen going forward. So first, you may have noticed that hydrogen has been all over the news and often cast as a solution, a clean solution, a solution for the climate, by the Biden administration, by all over the world and Europe too, and also very often by oil and gas itself, which that kind of raises some flags and some skepticism. But the truth about hydrogen, the vast majority of hydrogen, is that it will just maintain many of these examples of environmental injustice and also likely make them worse. So fracking in the Navajo Nation, the frontline communities that are impacted by the gas industry in Pennsylvania and Louisiana's Cancer Alley. Most of the hydrogen economy will maintain this. And so today we will walk through some of the top line messages of why hydrogen gas should not be considered a clean energy solution, how green hydrogen fits in. That was a really common question that we saw come up. And then the implications of hydrogen hubs in the context of the Inflation Reduction Act. And lastly, so we end on a good note, what we should be focusing our attention on instead. So some high-level framing. First, it is very important to know that the hydrogen gas conversation is designed to be super complicated and confusing. Like, this is an intentional tactic. Hydrogen advocates really leverage the fact that hydrogen is so complicated to contribute to an overall positive image of hydrogen. And so industry advocates want us to think that we need an all of the above approach. They'll take, some positive potentials of hydrogen and use that to justify all investments in all types of hydrogen and uses that are actually, kind of harmful. Secondly, we should remember that the debate is not what types of hydrogen gas are actually clean. There are a lot of colors that distract us, like, is it green? What about blue? What are the pros and cons? But rather, we should be stepping back and asking, what are the most equitable and cleanest energy solutions for our transition writ large, and then that will show us that hydrogen is actually playing a really small sliver of it, and there's a lot more proven solutions we should be focusing on. And third, a temporal element, investments in green hydrogen, which is often the one that is seen as the most potential for the clean economy, won't actually be ready to use until the mid-2030s and possibly the 2040s. And at that point, we just can't wait till then. We have things we know that work today that we should be pursuing instead. So first, we'll talk about hydrogen production. And this is where all the colors come in. There's gray, there's blue, there's green. The bottom line is that hydrogen produced from fossil gas, which is gray, or fossil gas with carbon capture technology, which is also a little bit sus, that's blue. Nuclear energy, biomethane, biomass, these are all not clean. All of them release climate pollutants, and all of them release some type of health damaging air pollutants, and they all maintain polluting facilities in frontline communities. The green hydrogen, this means it is hydrogen produced from zero emission renewable energy, so wind or solar, producing the hydrogen, and this is okay. In the production process of this, it does not, like in theory, it is zero emission. But burning, like actually using the hydrogen, can still be dirty. And yes, all of these slides will be sent out, and also the resource, like blogs and briefs that goes into deeper information on this, we will drop in the chat and send it out after the webinar. So moving on to hydrogen uses, there's a couple ways it can be used. One is burning hydrogen. This releases significant air pollution. Some studies show as much as 6 times more. And then blending hydrogen, and this is what oil and gas companies are like super behind, because they want to use their existing gas distribution pipelines and things like that, just to put in some hydrogen and say that, you know, this is better for the planet. But there are major safety concerns, and we're talking like explosions. There's also the threat of leakages that no one's figured out yet. That's going to take a bunch of investment to figure out. And it's really not that like impressive of a climate impact. Like right now we can only blend like a small portion into fossil gas pipelines, and it doesn't actually make that much of a difference in terms of climate change. And then there's still a lot of air pollution. So the cleanest, the carbon-free and pollution-free way for using hydrogen is using green hydrogen in a fuel cell. But there's a big caveat. Using green hydrogen in a fuel cell is significantly more expensive. It uses so much more water. It's less efficient and it's less safe. And, you know, just to really highlight how not efficient it is compared to just using renewable energy onto the grid and electrifying things, you can see there's so many more steps in this graphic. And then when we talk about less safe, we mean like literal explosions. These are pictures from hydrogen facilities. Like hydrogen is a very flammable, tiny molecule, hard to contain, and there's a huge threat, like really intense safety concerns here. And then when we say much more expensive, we mean like way expensive. And we don't even know the ceiling. We just know it's going to be so expensive for infrastructure upgrades. And that's not including like operating it yet. And an example is this hydrogen proposal from a investor-owned utility in California, SoCal Gas. They had a proposal where they're like, you know, we want to do hydrogen as a way to become net zero, quote unquote. It's going to, in quotes, several hundreds of millions of dollars would be required for infrastructure upgrades. And who would be paying for that? They would probably, I mean, they say in there, we would have to probably shift costs to ratepayers, which means us. We would be paying for it. And we'd be paying for something that probably won't work and would come online in the 2040s. So at this point, you might be thinking, so green hydrogen is not amazing, but it's also not the worst. Is it still a worthy investment? The answer to that is it's really expensive and hard to get right. Studies show that, yes, there is a role for green hydrogen for things that cannot be electrified, like shipping or aviation, but it must be done carefully. And really, we just don't want it to dominate the conversation. So in this example up top, there is a proposal, or maybe it's already happening in Utah for green hydrogen, but like there's a lot of conditions to get this right. They already have storage there. They have to think about transport and distribution. There's a lot of money involved. There needs to be existing transmission lines. There needs to be renewable energy capacity. It's just hard to get right. But really what's been dominating the conversation is blue hydrogen. And this is the one where you use fossil fuel infrastructure and gas or fossil fuels to create the hydrogen. And then you slap on some carbon capture technology, which also is not proven, also expensive, also, has some issues. But oil and gas companies are really throwing their weight behind blue hydrogen because they want to claim that it's possible for blue hydrogen to be clean, and they are using that all of the above tactic, and they kind of piggyback off the potential of green hydrogen to create this mirage of clean hydrogen. All of these different tactics of hydrogen can possibly be clean. And blue hydrogen has an even more impossible set of conditions. We're talking massive, expensive upgrades to existing fossil fuel infrastructure that is totally not proven, much more than green hydrogen. And it would be maintaining fossil fuel infrastructure. So all of the problems that we face right now, air, water pollution, so many impacts to the health of frontline communities, that would still be there. So it's all a bit, not great. So it is with this focus on blue hydrogen that takes us to the momentum of hydrogen hubs, which, is not to surprise to anyone, blue hydrogen plays a really big role in this. And so Sylvia's going to talk us through hydrogen hubs and the Inflation Reduction Act.
Hey everyone, I'm Sylvia Chi with Just Solutions Collective. And yeah, so the reason that we're talking about hydrogen and you're hearing so much about it in the news and stuff is because the federal government has already invested a lot or announced their intentions to invest a lot in this technology. And it first started with the infrastructure law, which passed last year. And that included a lot of direct investments and subsidies for hydrogen. One piece of that is the Hydrogen Hubs program, and another part of it is the Clean Hydrogen Production Standard. The infrastructure law also required the government to develop and release this hydrogen roadmap, the National Strategy and Hydrogen Roadmap, which identifies 3 strategies: high impact end uses, reducing costs, and a focus on regional networks to ramp up scale. And as part of that, the Department of Energy has also been running this hydrogen shot program, which is trying to get hydrogen to be really cheap. And their specific goal is to get it to $1 per kilogram of hydrogen by 2031. And so everything the federal government is doing is kind of part of that strategy. The Hydrogen Hubs program, that's part of the infrastructure law, is part of this regional network part of the strategy in particular. And so what that program is they have $8 billion authorized to build hydrogen hubs around the country. And they're meant to be these regional centers that are networked from where the hydrogen is produced to where it is used. And on the slide is a kind of idealized infographic of what this hydrogen hub would look like. So you'll see that it can be created from different kinds of energy sources, and then it's produced, and there's different end uses, in whether that's through industry or generating electricity, or for residential or commercial heating. That's when they blend it with natural gas to heat, and that's has a lot of air pollution involved in that. And then the Clean Hydrogen Production Standard, that was also called for in the infrastructure law. The Department of Energy just released or about a month ago, released their draft Clean Hydrogen Production Standard. And the one that they've proposed there is 4 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. And they just extended the comment period on that draft standard yesterday. So they're still taking input on that, and that's supposed to be a life cycle standard. So that carbon intensity is supposed to be from I think they're calling it well to gate. So like from where the energy source comes out to when it gets produced. And then, so that's all under the infrastructure law. The Inflation Reduction Act, which just passed a few months ago, also incentivizes hydrogen further, and that's primarily, or that's entirely through tax credits. And there's a few different ways that that works. There are a couple different tax credits. One is for producing hydrogen specifically for electricity, and then there's also just the investment tax credit, which taxpayers, like project developers, can claim for the cost of investing in facilities that produce hydrogen. And then there's also a hydrogen production tax credit, which is just for producing hydrogen itself. And that amount of incentive depends on the life cycle carbon intensity of the hydrogen. So they are trying to incentivize greener forms of hydrogen that have less carbon intensity in the life cycle. But those are all, well, the hydrogen production tax credit is still under development. They haven't released the RFI for that. But those are some of the different ways that the federal government is currently incentivizing hydrogen. And then, yeah, so this map shows some of what we know so far about the hydrogen hubs that are being proposed and are under development. And so this hydrogen hubs program, they released the funding opportunity announcement a few weeks ago, I think. And so we don't have all the information yet. My experience has been with the infrastructure law, there hasn't been great transparency in reporting of like what's going on with like implementation, but the deadline for applying for a hydrogen hub is going to be at basically the end of the year. So we'll know more information then. But as the slide shows, DOE wants to locate 2 hydrogen hubs in regions with abundant natural gas resources. So that'll probably be kind of like Oklahoma, Louisiana area, and then perhaps in like Pennsylvania-ish. There's also going to be 1 hub each for fossil fuels, nuclear, and renewable as the energy source. And then they said, I think total they want to have 6 to 10 regional hubs funded at this point. And then they might consider funding more next year, I think.
Thanks, Sylvia. And so, I mean, those are huge numbers backing the hydrogen economy for, a lot of blue hydrogen, a lot, which is, essentially gray, like it is essentially fossil fuel fueled hydrogen. And really what we want to end this presentation on is that our argument against hydrogen really must be about how the outsized attention on hydrogen gas distracts us from more viable climate solutions. So yes, it can be argued that there's a role for green hydrogen and so on, but the outsized attention that hydrogen is getting is really distracting us, is a missed opportunity for all the energy we could be putting in for more equitable climate solutions. And so many studies have shown that for the vast majority of our lives, and we're talking buildings, homes, cars, and like buses, all of that, we have proven solutions for renewable energy, energy storage, demand side management, energy democracy is really what we want to be striving for. And these are all better investment choices. So when we're talking about green hydrogen, it really should only be for difficult to electrify sectors as a last resort. And I mentioned aviation, shipping, so on. And so one way to do this is to make sure that state and federal classifications define green hydrogen as pollution-free and zero emission. And we have some folks on the call today that can answer some more specific technical questions about that. organizing against it and like really making sure that our movement is ready and prepared to fight hydrogen when lobbyists like from the oil and gas industry, hydrogen advocates, they've been preparing for this moment for like the last 10 years. So we end on that note, and here's a slide with a couple resources. This presentation was based off the community-friendly resources up top, and I'll drop them in the chat, and they'll also go out in the post email. And there's other great resources here too. But with that, we thank you for your time, and we're super excited to pass it over to our community-based organization representatives.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jillian and Sylvia. First up, we'll hear from Shana Lazaro from Communities for a Better Environment to talk more about their experience with hydrogen hubs.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much. I'm so honored to be talking with all of you this morning. I really am. My name is Shana Lazaro. I'm the legal director at Communities for a Better Environment. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm talking to you from Ohlone territory, unceded Ohlone territory, known as Berkeley, California, which is geographically right in between two of the communities where CBE organizes, East Oakland and Richmond, California. We also organize in the LA area, in Southeast Los Angeles, and in Wilmington, city of LA. I'm really glad to see some friendly faces on here today. I was asked to talk for about 5 minutes, which is challenging to say everything I have to say about hydrogen in California in 5 minutes. So I want to start with my key takeaways, and really appreciate that there are about 25 minutes left for Q&A at the end. So my big takeaways for California advocates and for all of our communities around the country with whom our California communities can link arms and stand strong together. California has really big plans for hydrogen, and they are planning to move forward with or without our community's support. So I feel like we need to be very strategic about how and where we insert ourselves, including making sure that we speak for ourselves and don't have folks who 30 years ago or 20 years ago may have been affiliated with one of our communities representing themselves as voices of our communities. So that's my first point. Hydrogen is coming. We need to be strategic about it. California right now makes and uses a huge amount of hydrogen. We had Governor Schwarzenegger with big visions for our hydrogen highway that frankly came to nothing. And almost all of our hydrogen today is made through fossil gas, through steam methane reforming, and almost all of it is used at refineries. So when we talk about this is the clean path to getting off fossil fuels and to saving our planet, really appreciated the framework that this is actually the oil and gas industry grasping for a lifeline to avoid the inevitable. So that's my second point. Third key takeaway, that within CBE and within our communities, our knowledge is growing, but we really need to support each other in building our understanding. So at the moment, CBE supports hydrogen in very specific instances. So we're looking at how it's produced, how it's stored, how it's transported, and how its end uses are strictly defined. So we're looking only at hydrogen made from electrolysis. I saw there was a question in the Q&A about how do we ensure that grid power, which is not clean power, is not the thing that is used in electrolysis. So we're looking at additional power that is specifically generated from solar or wind or geothermal. In California, we define renewables to include some very dirty resources. We need to see those excluded because our environmental justice communities are already so overburdened by things like biomass, it's not actually clean, and it's not part of the, just transition if it's made from dirty resources. The way that it's stored and transported have to be strictly defined and monitored. And we really need to see technological development, especially in leak detection, because some of the, the recent research is showing that in addition to, the risks and dangers of explosion, that hydrogen is an indirect greenhouse gas. And so plans to decarbonize using hydrogen could actually, even if all things go perfectly, if it's leaking, it's going to make our climate change problems worse. So this is a significant danger to our communities and to the environment, to the entire planet. And then the end uses that are being discussed, we hear, a lot of blend and burn conversation. Hydrogen needs to be used only in non-combustion contexts and only in truly hard to electrify sectors. So we have the technology to, for instance, power heavy duty vehicles. That technology exists. The technology to, safely store and transport hydrogen, that's in development. So use the technologies that we actually have to both improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas impacts. And the final takeaway, wow, this actually is going to be 5 minutes. I have a survey of California projects ready to discuss with you all as well. So maybe I will take 1 extra minute. My final takeaway is keep in mind that hydrogen is not a bridge fuel. We hear about it. Some of us from California were just in a conversation with the Arches folks who made a brief reference to, we're just going to be using hydrogen blending on our way to 100% hydrogen as a bridge to truly, something else. Changing over to production, storage, and transportation and end uses, all of which involve hydrogen, it requires a huge infrastructure change. That's why, as Sylvia was talking about, all this money is being pumped into it. This is not just some little tweak to our existing pipeline systems. So if we make this entire infrastructure change, it will be as permanent as our existing fossil-based infrastructure. So 30 years from now, our next generation, 60 years from now, our generation following is going to be having these same conversations about how do we get clean and how do we save our planet. So those are my key takeaways. I will run quickly through some of the new hydrogen projects that we see coming down the pike in California. They're divided into refinery projects and non-refinery projects, understanding that all the hydrogen production in California right now is a is a refinery project. So I may run out of time for the refinery projects and would be happy to follow up with those of you who I know are specifically interested in refineries afterward. So the first California project that folks are talking about and are having, all of the oxygen sucked out of the air and replaced with hydrogen is Arches. That is the, so our governor's office was quite heavy-handed in insisting that there was going to be a single California hydrogen proposal, one unified proposal. So it's a partnership between the University of California, GoBiz, which is our the governor's office business folks, and many others. It has subsumed some other fairly robust hydrogen hub proposals, like one from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, City of LA. As with all the hubs, the letter of intent is going in, or prospectus is going in November 9th. The full proposal will be submitted next April. I will say the community outreach for this Arches has been abysmal. We were being heavily outreached to by City of LA and by Alta-C, other hub proposals, and we didn't hear from them. We heard from them through our allies at Sierra Club, and Sierra Club has really been a good partner to our environmental justice communities in insisting that they will not participate in conversations if environmental justice communities are not present. So that's Arches. It's very amorphous. You have to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to participate, and you know, it's going on. LADWP has a project as part of its plan to reach 100%. It's called LA 100, and based on some modeling done by NREL, LADWP has concluded that it needs to burn hydrogen in existing at least one existing gas-fired power plant. One of the questions in advance was about LADWP's plans. I'm happy to talk about them more tomorrow. There may or may not be a committee vote on the first of those plants called Scattergood, doing exactly what I was talking about with a bridge fuel. So starting with a hydrogen blend, going theoretically to 100% hydrogen combustion. We are very concerned that LADWP's three other gas-fired power plants that are slated to retire would similarly be repowered. And so, yes, LADWP is trying to put itself on a trajectory for that. Southern California Gas has applied to explore building something called the Angeles Link, which would be a series of pipelines to transport green hydrogen into the LA basin. For those of us who organize in the communities where those pipelines would go, we are extremely concerned. We are obviously concerned about every step in that chain. Angeles Link plans to sell its hydrogen to LADWP. Let's see. The University of California is partnering with the California gas utilities to run a blending demonstration project. As was mentioned in the first presentation, there's a significant problem with blending hydrogen into methane gas or fossil gas in the existing infrastructure. It damages the pipes. It's called pipe embrittlement, and they don't really know how to deal with it. And so they're running demonstration projects. They're planning to apply to run demonstration projects to see if they can, you know, start putting hydrogen into homes and buildings. There is also a proposal by a California gas utility to do an all hydrogen demonstration home. And I'm forgetting some really significant, oh yeah, so HyBuild LA is underway. Their first phase was already completed. It is sponsored by the Green Hydrogen Coalition, and it's an initiative to create the first scaled hub for green hydrogen in North America. It has dollars per kilo targets. And I believe some folks who are on this, participating on this call are participants in that. PG&E has a Pacific Gas and Electric, our Northern California investor-owned utility, has a hydrogen to infinity project, which is a 10-year demonstration study with pipelines, again, studying whether it's safe, and that's co-located, not surprisingly, with a gas-fired power plant. Last one I'll flag is the shore-to-shore demonstration projects in the Port of LA and the Port of Hueneme, both low-income communities of color, which also have been working in partnership with some community. They're demonstrating some interesting technologies, and they began last year. I will, I think, end there because I've gone way beyond 5 minutes, but as I said, there are refinery projects. CBE is litigating over some of those projects, and I'm happy to discuss them with any refinery advocates out there. Thank you again for having me.
Thanks so much, Shauna. That was great. And next, I will pass it on to Daniel Chu from New York City Environmental Justice Alliance.
Hey everyone, my name is Daniel Chu. I am the energy planner with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And I believe I have some slides that yeah, thank you, Taylor. So the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance is a nonprofit citywide membership network linking grassroots organizations from low-income neighborhoods and communities of color in New York in their struggle for environmental justice. We empower our 11 members to advocate for improved environmental conditions and against inequitable environmental burdens by coordinating campaigns designed to inform city and state and sometimes federal policies. Next slide. And I think the larger context of talking about hydrogen and the use of hydrogen in New York really is, in New York at least, is based on the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Law, which is our state climate law, which has all these provisions regarding emissions reduction, renewable energy production, emissions-free grid by 2040, and net zero by 2050, and less than 50% of that can only as much as 15% of that can come from offsets. Next slide. And so in New York, when we're talking about hydrogen, New York's governor has actually joined up with New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts governor, along with several other companies. I think there's 40 companies and government entities combined to pursue for funding from the DOE for a hydrogen hub. And recently we're seeing use cases or proposals in New York where hydrogen is actually being blended or proposed to be blended into power plant facilities to generate electricity. And we're seeing some risk on that, and then we're trying to mitigate in New York City, but also throughout our state. Next slide. So one of the biggest thing about hydrogen that popped out in New York City is Energy Astoria. Energy Astoria is a peaker plant in Astoria, which is also colloquially known as Asthma Alley because of the high rates of asthma in that neighborhood and in South Bronx. So basically thinking about all the stretch from South Bronx to Queens, where there are around, I think, 11, if not more, power plants concentrated in that area. And they proposed to repower a few years ago, but essentially the repowering project is construction of a brand new power plant to replace their existing old peaker plant. And they cited the ability to convert to combusting hydrogen out of the clean fuels to be carbon-free to comply with the climate law. However, the New York City Department of Environmental Conservation denied the permit for repowering, and Energy Astoria actually sued to get that permit from the state. So NEJA and our allies joined the DEC after Energy appealed the decision to make sure that the decision stays there and the permit stays denied. And in the DEC's decision, they noted that hydrogen combustion is actually not in line with our climate law because combusting hydrogen produces emissions, even though it's not carbon dioxide emissions. So actually would not fit the climate law's definition of 100% emissions-free grid by 2040. Hence, that was a huge reason of why we're able to get that permit tonight. Next slide. And just a more concrete use case of hydrogen, the New York Power Authority, which is one of the public benefit corporations that is run by the state, actually conducted a pilot of blending hydrogen in power plant. So in NYPA's peaker plant in Brentwood, Long Island, they actually did an experiment. They call it the Hydrogen Demonstration Project, in which they blended hydrogen with natural gas for a period of time. So over the course of a few months, NYPA blended 12.5 hours of hydrogen with a blend of up to 44% of hydrogen compared to with natural gas. And this is done on a water injected turbine, which is not a typical electric generation turbine that you see. With typical turbines that generate electricity are actually dry, low NOx turbines that doesn't use water at all. And the results from the NIPA study actually shows only around a 14% reduction of CO2, even though hydrogen was blended up to 35% when they saw the 14% reduction. And NOx emissions definitely increased within the permit limits, but NIPA noted that if this was done at scale, it would not be within the permit limits in terms of blending hydrogen and combusting hydrogen. And NIPA noted that after this demonstration project, they actually don't plan on pursuing further hydrogen projects, even though they have not definitely closed the door on blending hydrogen in their power plants in the future. And really, this serves to show that hydrogen, even when blended, can be a public health hazard. And in the short term, it's really not a bridge fill because of all the challenges that it creates as you blend hydrogen. And this is done on a turbine where water can help mitigate the NOx emissions aspect of it, whereas in a typical dry low NOx turbine, you would not have water to help mitigate the NOx emissions. And the full report from NIPA is actually behind a paywall from General Electric for I think around $25,000, and we are working with some allies to pursue a request for information and making sure that the public funding for this project is actually, the results can be shown publicly, so we can know exactly how much NOx emissions there were and what are the public health impacts and all the cumulative pollution that this demonstration project has created. Next slide. So I know I talked a lot about hydrogen use cases in the proposals. Really, when we think about the use of hydrogen in New York and what we're trying to fight to make sure that even if New York got the funding, can only be included in the funding, is that we only, in some limited use cases, support green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced by splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen using renewable electricity, and any kind of other hydrogen projects such as blue, pink, or gray hydrogen should not be supported by the state. Next slide. And just to further add on to that, as I've noted about combustion and compliance with the emissions-free grid, many end uses of hydrogen and green hydrogen will be prohibited under New York's climate law. This includes electricity generation or using for building decarbonization. So using hydrogen to blend into your boilers and use it to heat your homes. Although I want to know that NEJA does not necessarily oppose all uses of hydrogen in a just transition in cases such as industrial feedstock and in some cases of long distance freight, for example, or steel production in some limited use cases. Hydrogen can be a very limited but useful resource in terms of decarbonizing our grid and decarbonizing all the energy that we use in New York. Next slide. And so our technical concerns regarding hydrogen remains the emissions aspect. So combusting hydrogen, producing higher levels of NOx emissions compared to fossil fuels. I think a study recently shown that it's 5 times as much NOx emissions, which is a huge public health concern for us. Efficiency, I think Jillian shared a slide earlier about efficiency of battery storage compared to hydrogen. Definitely hydrogen in most cases is way less efficient compared to battery storage. And in terms of what we're seeing in the phase out of power plants, most power plant companies are choosing to build battery storage and renewable energy instead of hydrogen fuel cells as a replacement for their existing power generation facilities. And obviously the safety aspect of transporting hydrogen and where you're storing these hydrogen. We're seeing proposals of transporting and storing hydrogen, and we're concerned that a lot of these proposals, the hydrogen, the highly combustible fuels, and the leakages will happen in disadvantaged communities or what New York calls environmental justice communities. Next slide. And so what Hydrogen Hub means for New York's EJ communities really is an excuse for fossil fuel interests to continue polluting our communities and undermine our both state and city climate laws and perpetuate an energy affordability issue because of how expensive it is to generate this fuel and use it a lot of places. And so we are working on many aspects and lacking in many holes to make sure that in New York's pursuit for Hydrogen Hub, we hope that they don't pursue the Hydrogen Hub further, but even if they do, we want to make sure that we can put in these guardrails around combustion and making sure that there are guarantees of using only green hydrogen for a very limited number of use cases, so the hydrogen does not become something that continues to harm our communities. Next slide. And I'm just linking here, I'm happy to share the link in the chat as well about some resources that New York Renews, which is a coalition that we are a part of statewide that helped pass the climate law, and Peak Coalition, which is a coalition that NEJA is also a part of that works to phase out the peaker plants in New York City around our statements and reports on hydrogen. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you both, Daniel and Shauna, for those Great presentations. I learned so much. And now we want to open it up to our Q&A portion. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or use the Q&A feature. And while we wait for some questions, I'd like to ask anyone who wants to answer on our team, what types of things do you, or types of projects do you have that you would recommend for folks to support instead of hydrogen hubs in their communities? Or yeah, any general advice on combating hydrogen hubs as they are making a larger and larger appearance in EJ communities? No thoughts from anyone on our team? Okay. I think we have a raised hand from one of the attendees, Kathleen. I'll go ahead and unmute you, and if you'd like to ask your question.
Okay, I unmuted. I think I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm trying to be an informed advocate for my community here in Port of Los Angeles in California, where there was discussed that Arches is doing a Green Hub application. There's a lot of language I do not understand. I learned a lot today. Thank you to everyone. Can you tell me what a peaker plant is?
Great question. Does someone on our team want to answer that one?
Sure, happy to answer that. So peaker plants are power plants that come online when energy demand is higher. So thinking about when everyone gets home and turns on their ACs or heaters, if their heaters are electrified at night, peaker plants turn on to make sure that the grid can supply extra electricity so that every household has power and that there's no blackouts or brownouts. And the reason why peaker plants are an issue is because peaker plants are often the oldest and most polluting and also the most costly power plants we have on the grid right now.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, Shauna, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to also follow up on that. So a peaker plant, so when those moments happen on the grid, when we need power to ramp up, the control technology that that reduces oxides of nitrogen that are coming out of those combustion power plants, they take a while to start working. The selective catalytic reduction technology, it needs to heat up to a certain temperature. And so if you're talking about sudden changes in how the power plant is working, the pollution controls that they have in place just aren't going to work. So whether it's like specifically designated as a peaker plant that operates in those moments, or whether they're just working that way because that's what the market is asking, those are the times when communities like San Pedro and Wilmington are seeing the most pollution from the power plants that are located inside them.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that context. We had a couple of questions come into the Q&A. Let's see. So one question is, are any EJ orgs or coalitions planning to provide comments on the US DOE's clean hydrogen production standard by the November 14th deadline? So anyone who spoke today, are those in plans for anyone here?
Yeah, Nijo was put in touch with Earth Justice recently regarding jointly submitting a comment regarding that. And I think we're definitely gonna sign on to the comment. pending further review, but interested in making sure that the production standards are lowered to make sure that hydrogen is not just universally classified as clean when it's under 4 kilos.
Yeah, and so CBE was likewise reached out to by Earth Justice, and we're extremely concerned. We feel like having a carbon intensity standard is, a death knell for our communities, because in our internal state planning, we also are seeing this kind of, sleight of hand or shell game that you can play with carbon intensity. And so, yeah, I also feel like it's very likely that we will be signing on to those comments.
Go ahead, Daniel.
I forgot what I was going to say, so I will catch back when I remember it.
Sounds good. Awesome. Thank you both for that. Another question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I know the reason why DOE kind of put out those kind of proposals regarding clean hydrogen production standards in an attempt to move away from classifying hydrogen such as green, pink, gray, blue, et cetera, which potentially could be helpful. But then again, going back to like we wanting to limiting the use of hydrogen only to green hydrogen, certainly clarifying the definition would help, but you can't clarify the definition by loosening it to like making a definition looser than a green hydrogen. We want it to be stricter than that.
Awesome. Great. And another question, Jillian, if you want to answer this question, any advice on combating hydrogen hubs?
Yes, this is a really good question. And what we've been hearing from our network of organizers that we're in contact with across states, there's a really good story that's ongoing in New Mexico, where a coalition of frontline organizations and EJ groups and indigenous-led groups, they have been fighting a governor who's very into hydrogen, and a governor who has introduced 4 different pro-hydrogen bills, and the coalition has nixed it every time. And upon their reflections, they attribute community mobilization, really coming together as a coalition to push against make it so it's greater than the sum of the parts. Digital organizing was really effective, really having some legislative strategy and organizing, and it really has come back in their ledge sessions so much, and they are continuing to organize against it. And with the hydrogen hubs, it just really highlights the efforts to even come together and get out there on the ground for community education, as well as being in the building for public comment and showing up that way. So it's been like a big combination of coalition organizing, as well as strategic policy and ledge coordinating. And this is for New Mexico. Yeah. And yeah, it's a great, there's plenty of other states too that are organizing against this. And I think it's just it's one of these things that is coming up on the radar, but it feels like we're still kind of trying to catch up. So any lessons learned that anyone can share in the chat would be really helpful.
Thank you, Jillian. And we do have quite a few questions still coming in, and we are nearing the end of time. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time and just ask this one last question. And if your question wasn't answered today, we will be sharing more resources after this event. And you can always reach out to us if those resources don't answer your questions, and we'll connect you with the right people to get those questions answered. So to both Daniel and Shauna, if you could end us off on, if you could share any advice to organizers facing hydrogen in their community, what would you say to them?
Do you want to go first, Daniel?
Feel free to go first, Shanna.
Oh, I mean, buckle your seatbelt, link arms with other community members. I'm so, excited to learn from New Mexico and from New York. I feel like really asking the questions, you know, how is it going to be made? Commit in writing to us about what is going to make this hydrogen, where you're going to store the hydrogen when you make it, how you're going to get it into our communities. Are you going to replicate historic, you know, racist land use policies by digging under our community members' homes and, you know, continuing to expose us to those dangers? How is it going to be used in the end? You say that it's going to, you know, reduce diesel impacts. Well, we had a whole plan to electrify to reduce diesel impacts. What's going to happen to that? Are you comparing a future baseline against the electrified future? Or are you comparing it against, oh, if we continue to use fossil fuels, which no one is going to continue to use fossil fuels unless we enable them to? It's not great advice, but it's the best I think I have. Organize, organize, organize.
Yeah, I mean, organizing is definitely one of the core, I think, of how we can make sure that communities across the country are having informed thoughts and coordinated responses regarding the deployment of hydrogen hubs across the country. I think making sure that, you know, when we're talking with frontline communities, that each of their concern from different communities is addressed. I know in New York, for example, like water consumption has not been a huge issue of hydrogen production here, but I feel like it definitely will be a huge concern in other communities. And so in New York, what our concern is more localized emissions because we have millions of people living in a very small area that any kind of minor increase in emissions can quickly impact a large number of population. And so making sure we can work across different states, making sure we can work across different regions and be really informed on both the technical aspects of it, because that's where I think the government and private entities interested in hydrogen will try to hit us hardest on, making sure we're informed on the science of it, making sure we're informed on the studies, and making sure that we can share those with each other and organize with each other. I think that's the most important part.
Amazing. Thank you both for that. And thank you to everyone who spoke today. And thank you to everyone for jumping on this call with us. This was great. We will be sharing the recording of today's event as well as all of the resources that were in the chat with everyone. I'm dropping the link to our post-event survey. Feel free to fill this out to give us feedback on the event, but also to let us know if there's more topics around Hydrogen Hub you'd like us to explore and put together for you all, or if you had questions that went unanswered and you'd like us to connect you to someone as well. Just Solutions Collective also just launched a Facebook group for BIPOC-Frontline EJ leaders to connect with one another and share resources and information. So I'll put that in the chat if that description applies to you, and you can join that and connect with peers that way. And with that, I'll end us off. Thank you all again for making time to meet with us. Thank you to our speakers for taking time out of your schedule to share your expertise. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.